Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Kingdom Rush? Hang about, you might be saying if you happen to be stereotypically British, or you could be saying, hang on mate. That's also a possibility. Didn't this come out a while ago? Well, yes, Kingdom Rush came out on Armor Games and Congregate and a lot of other Flash sites a long time ago, and then it came out on iPad, I believe actually 2 years ago, if you can believe that. However, it then cropped up a lot later on Steam Greenlight, and it came along with a promise that they'd be redoing the game in an entirely new engine, which as it turns out was Unity. And making the game 1080p and putting all sorts of PC exclusive features, as well as taking out the features from the Flash version on Armor Games as well as the iPad version, specifically the monetization factor of it. And they did that. But unfortunately, it comes along with some caveats. There are some problems that I would like to talk about. The first part of this video is going to be focused on those technical issues. Now, I'd like to put out a little disclaimer. I received some private messages from the developers Ironhide for this particular title after I'd done my research stream on Twitch where we discovered the frame rate related problems that this game had. Now, what they stated is that they will be fixing it, but it looks like the first fix is going to be a lock to 30 frames per second in order to get the game to run properly. They also said they will be trying to properly fix the game at a later date to allow it to run natively at 60 frames per second. So, why is this a problem? Well, there's a few issues with it. First issue is, of course, that in 2014, games should not be running at 30 frames per second. I've been pretty outspoken on this issue, which is weird because I would think that most PC gamers would agree with me, but it seems like perhaps either people just don't understand why frame rate is important, or they actually don't care, which is cool too. You know, if you want a game at 30 FPS, that's cool, but on PC, I don't think that should ever be a factor. You should always be able to game at 60 at least. And some of us, of course, have 120 Hz monitors. So having the game locked to 30 means that the game will just play less smoothly. It will not appear as smooth on the screen. It's less enjoyable to play in general. So what is the actual problem with it? Alright, so it's quite specific. What we discovered is that the game's speed is tied to the frame rate. You remember another game that was tied to the frame rate? Yeah, that was Need for Speed Most Wanted, I think? Yeah, it was the new version of Most Wanted. And I skewered the game for that. But in the case of Most Wanted, it was locked to 30 by default, and you had to unlock it to 60, and when you did that, the game's simulation speed completely broke, because whoever coded it was a damn idiot, and bound the physics simulation directly to the frame rate of the game, which should never actually happen, yeah? What should be happening is if you have variable frame rate, the game should actually keep running at the same speed, otherwise it would be ridiculous. Yeah? You understand that? Cool. Now, Kingdom Rush, this is where things get a little bit weird. So with Kingdom Rush, if you're running a 120Hz monitor or anything higher than 60, it takes half of that value and makes that the frame rate of the game. So for me, on 120Hz, I get 60. On 60Hz, I get 30. And a lot of PC gamers will be running on 60Hz displays, so they'll get 30 FPS, the way the game was intended to be played, which again, in my opinion, is a problem in and of itself, because 30 FPS is not acceptable, but it will run at the right speed. If you run it any higher than that, or indeed any lower than that, the simulation breaks. So what happens is, the creatures move twice as quickly. However, the firing speed of the towers is exactly the same. So perhaps you'd like to see the difference. I can demonstrate. I've taken footage at both 30 and 60 frames per second. Now, of course, YouTube will only display at 30, but this will demonstrate to you what happens to the simulation when you go above 30 frames per second. After I showed you that, I'll explain some of the problems with that, I'll tell you why it's bloody unacceptable, and then we'll get to the gameplay, the rest of which I will film at 30 to make sure you are seeing the proper simulation speed. So here we go. So there you have it. That's a comparison of 60 and 30 FPS. You will notice a couple of things. Firstly, the creatures move at twice the speed, meaning that it's a much, much harder game. Secondly, the towers fire at the same speed, which means that at 60, the towers are actually half as effective. This is particularly true in the case of any tower with area of effect damage like the artillery tower, which is something that you really need in the first few levels of the game to deal with those big hordes of enemies. It will fire at the same speed, and yet there will be more enemies moving past that tower. What you ideally want is to hold those enemies down using barracks and peasants to hold them in place, and then batter them with the area of effect cannons. You can't do that as effectively at 60 frames per second. It makes the game a hell of a lot more difficult, to the point, actually, where I was wondering why I couldn't beat level 3, because this is a game I played on iPad and got way, way further in than that, and I thought, this can't be right. I had to struggle on level 2 for about an hour to get 3 stars, and I was like, this is ridiculous, there's no way. It was a few years ago that I played it, but I was never this bad, surely. And then we worked it out, that's why. The damn thing is running far too fast. So, tying your simulation speed into your frame rate is bad for a number of reasons. It means, of course, that on these 120Hz or 144Hz monitors, or hell, some people are even running on 240Hz, it would be almost impossible to play this game. Ridiculously difficult. So that's fundamentally broken. Secondly, if you tie your simulation speed to your frame rate, if for some reason you have any kind of variance, let's say you want a lower-end PC, then you would run into gameplay problems there too, because the actual game itself would slow down, which should not happen. Funnily enough, playing at a lower than 30 FPS, as we tested out earlier on the research stream, actually gives you an advantage. The game runs slower, but the towers fire at the same speed. So the lower the frame rate, the more effective your towers are. So can you see why I would think that was broken? Again, a disclaimer, if this has been fixed at any point, we're going to annotate this video and write it in the description. And that's all I want to say about the technical aspects of the game. Right now, at the time of filming, in this first impressions, the game is balked unless you lock it to 30 frames per second, which in my opinion is also unacceptable. Cool, now we've got that out of the way, that's the options menu. That's actually not true. It's a Unity game, meaning that for the most part, with a lot of Unity games, you get this pre-game launcher, which gives you 5 graphics presets, and a windowed option along with a bunch of resolution options. Those are all available there. This is a 2D tower defense game, so you don't really need to customize too much, but if you're running on, say, a netbook or a very low-power PC, you might want to knock the presets down a little bit. So yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate. I would like to see key binding available here. When I went to the key bindings menu in the launcher, there weren't any, which is weird because there are actual keys involved in this game. Not too many, but there are some. So being able to rebind that would be nice. I'd imagine it would be particularly pertinent perhaps to left-handed gamers, but who knows. Anyway, let's play the game and show you exactly what's going on. So, as I mentioned before, it is a tower defense game. You might be wondering, well, why didn't you get past the 3rd level? Again, because I was playing on ultra ridiculous mode, i.e. 60 FPS, i.e. nigh on impossible. So, this should be a little easier now, I think. I'm going to fail now, aren't I? That's what's going to happen. So you might wonder what this is over here as well. This is actually iOS content that's coming later. This is all going to be free on PC, just as it was with iOS. And if you played on iOS, you might be wondering, well, where are the crystals? So on the iOS version, there are 2 currencies. Stars, which you earn by beating levels. Yeah, the more stars you get, the more upgrades you can buy in this tree here, which you can reset at any time, which you'll probably need to based on what level you're on. And there were crystals, and those crystals could be used to buy temporary buffs, and you could also purchase different heroes. Now, in this version, all the heroes are available for no additional cost, but you do need to pass certain levels to gain access to them. As you can see right there, hopefully we'll be able to get Sir Gerald Lightseeker once we've beaten a couple of levels here. So, it's actually quite nice, because I am not a fan of the microtransaction-based model in games that cost money. And when I have the option, I would prefer to just pay a lump sum for everything. Now, it's not that you couldn't pay a lump sum for everything with the iOS version, but they always had these options of buffs and things like that, which that kind of really rubs me the wrong way, because I can't trust the developer not to artificially inflate the difficulty level in order to encourage you to buy that stuff. So, I'm glad that it's not in the PC version. That said, they've also taken some stuff out, which is a little bit weird. Each of these levels in the iOS version actually had difficulty options, 3 of them, and then 2 of these, which allowed you to play in these different kind of challenges, yeah? So these were all here in the iOS version, but right here, I think when you clicked battle, there were 3 difficulty levels as well. They're all gone. I'm not really sure why that is. All right, well, I actually went into this level without checking my abilities, so I should probably have a quick look at that. You may also notice, of course, that this map is way more detailed, and there's a lot more doodads all over the place. It's nice. They actually put a lot of effort into making this game properly PC resolution. That's a terrible sentence. Try again, TotalBiscuit. What the hell's wrong with you? They put a lot of effort into making this look like a PC game and actually using the screen real estate. Although it doesn't seem to affect the gameplay that much because the maps are identical to the iOS version and the Flash version that you can play. Let's go to upgrades. Okay, so you can reset these at any time, which is really nice. So you can respec whenever you want. Now, I know there are a few nasty creatures and critters coming at me here. So I'm going to take an upgrade for my peasants. Yeah. And I'm going to upgrade my barracks as well. And I'm then going to take concentrated fire and rangefinder for my artillery. So I'm going to primarily use barracks and artillery, large hordes of enemies. But there are a couple of other things that I need to worry about. I don't think I'm going to grab these, though, in order to make that happen. So you'll see what I mean in a minute. This game ramps the difficulty up very, very quickly, which is good. It's a very challenging tower defense game. Okay, so as you can see, there is no mazing in this game. It's all what I like to call roadside TD, which is specific plots of land upon which you can build towers. You need to then optimize that in order to make it work. But it's a little bit more interactive than some of the more basic tower defense games. So we're going to start here with a Dwarven Bombard. There we go. And we could get a second one, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a barracks. And then I'm going to click on that again, and I'm going to be able to send my soldiers wherever I want them to be. So I want to put them somewhere where my bombard's going to be the most effective. In fact, I'm actually tempted to get a second bombard, but just to make sure, I was thinking of popping a mage tower there. I know there's going to be enemies coming from this direction, but right now I think I'm going to put another barracks here. The reason I'm putting it there is because I can actually send the soldiers to either side. That's something, obviously, that you have to do on the fly. I know the first few waves are coming from here, so I'm pretty much ready to go. And this should be a much easier experience than the previous version of the game I played, where these guys move twice as quickly, but my bombard shot at the same speed. Now, there's a couple of abilities you can use in the game, including rapidly respawning peasant soldiers, which you can spawn anywhere instantly, and a rain of fire from the sky, which can wipe out entire sodding waves. However, there's quite a lot of micro involved in this, and some of this is a little bit janky in my honest opinion, because you would think that the soldiers would actually engage something within line of sight. They really don't. Even if you put them in exactly the same spot. If one of them's slightly further ahead than the other, then they'll only send those forward, which is a little bit strange. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. It does involve more micromanagement than I think is strictly necessary as a direct result of that. There we go. And let's send the next wave in a little bit early so I get some extra gold. Alright, so there's a few tougher ones there. I'm actually going to pop a mage tower right there so I can start to blast away at these guys as they come into range. And I want to make sure they're still in mage tower range, so I don't know if I can push them. Yeah, I can push them forward far enough. At least those ones, but I can't push those forward. And then I'll throw a few more peasants in there. There we go. Cool. So I think you can see where this is going, right? You know, it's a fairly... I'd say it's a fairly basic tower defense game, but it has the features that you would expect from a TD. Yeah? And there's nothing particularly out of the ordinary about those features. But it's really nicely put together. Kingdom Rush became popular on iOS despite the fact that there are a huge amount of iOS tower defense games. Yeah? This is not a genre that I would describe as lacking on the iOS device. TDs became very, very popular early on with touchscreen devices because they were one of the only game types that could really be played on those devices without actually sacrificing the gameplay in any way. And it worked out pretty well for them, I've got to say. Kingdom Rush was on PC before it was on iOS, and now it comes back to PC, which makes the whole thing very strange. But what I would say is that, aside from the technical issues that I mentioned earlier, this game oozes a fairly significant amount of polish. It feels good, it looks good, the aesthetic is very nice, it's clean. It represents a lot of enemies on the screen without looking overly cluttered. It has this almost epic feel to the actual battles going on. And this is even on the earlier levels. There's a nice variety of enemies as well that all require different tactics. There are some advanced techniques that you can make use of. My wife has actually beaten this game on iOS with, I think, a platinum medal or something along those lines. So she's played a hell of a lot of it, and she's also played the sequel Kingdom Rush Frontiers, which was also on iOS, but iOS only, if I recall correctly. And she has found it to be extremely enjoyable. And she has also learned a number of different tricks, like the ability to spawn an additional wave of soldiers if you happen to upgrade your building. So you wait until your soldiers are almost dead, and then you hit the upgrade button on the barracks, and then you immediately spawn another set, which I think is a pretty cool, nifty little trick. Now, I'm having a pretty easy time of it right now, which is nice. I'm going to accelerate it just a little bit, just to make it a little more interesting. It's nice to have an easy time of it, because on the stream I was tearing my hair out, because this was so much more difficult with the buggy frame rate, I've got to say. Also, sheeps explode. 10 out of 10. Would buy. I think it's a bit of a harder sell on PC for a number of reasons. The first reason is that we've got a lot of tower defense games, and we happen to have a lot of good ones as well, which include things like... Oh, what was the name of it? Was it Soul Sacrifice? It was certainly Soul something. It's completely gone out of my mind, and that makes me feel really bad. But we also have things like Defense Grid, which are considered by many people to be some of the best tower defense games ever made. So, it's a bit hard to compete with that, especially when you released your game as a free Flash game earlier on. That's when things get a little bit tougher. You're trying to sell the game for, right now, $8. It will be $10 once the launch week sale is gone. You're trying to sell that for $10, and yet you have a free version on Armor Games that you can play, which admittedly does have optional upgrades, which you can pay for. And your iOS version is currently 99 cents, and you also have the sequel Frontiers on iOS, also for cheaper. It becomes a more difficult sell at that point. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get it. At least on the basis of the gameplay. Because the gameplay is actually extremely enjoyable. It's a very enjoyable game to play. I personally like it an awful lot. Surprisingly so. I didn't think I would like the game as much as I do. But the game is just really well balanced and polished. It allows for a number of different strategies. It allows for you to actually mess with those strategies on the fly, which is always good. I like the interactivity of certain tower defense games, which I certainly will find here. I dislike those TDs that don't really involve you in any way, where you just kind of sit there and say, all right, cool, we're playing a tower defense game, my towers are set up, now I just sit there watching things happen. Because of these rapid cooldown abilities and the fact that you can move your soldiers around, which is vitally important to actually getting through the level with 3 stars, you will find that the game is a lot more engaging, perhaps, than you would expect from a tower defense. I'm going to move our soldiers there to intercept. I'm trying to get all of these guys in a bunch so that I can hit them with the fireballs. There are healers in there right now, which has made this whole thing a hell of a lot more difficult. There we go. Got some actual real soldiers in there. I'm going to try and get the second healer up there, and then we can bomb them. There we go. So we can nuke them with that. That seemed to do the job for the most part. Excellent. It's getting a little bit more hectic now, but nothing we can't really handle. God, this is so much easier now that I'm not having to worry about that 60 FPS issue. Jeez, it's an entirely different game. You want a hardcore TD experience? That's it right there. Ridiculously difficult. Nigh on impossible, I would say, because of the differences in fire rate for the towers. It's not just the speed, it's the actual fire rate. I think if they manage to fix this, and they manage to fix it properly, it will definitely be something that I could easily recommend, but a lot of you are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to pay for a TD. The reasons I'm not going to pay for a TD are as follows. 1, there are plenty of tower defense mods that I can get for stuff like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, especially considering StarCraft 2's arcade is going to go free, and I do mean completely free, not free to play, free, in patch 2.1. So I could play something like Elemental TD or Marine Defense or anything like that, Squadron Tower Defense, for free. And they're all frequently updated and they're all very, very playable. I could do all of that stuff. And I wouldn't say you were wrong. You absolutely wouldn't be wrong. You're completely right. You can do all of those things if you so desire. Secondly, you would argue to me, look, I can get Kingdom Rush on any other platform and it'll be cheaper. It's cheaper on iOS, it's free on Armor Games, the gameplay is the same, even if it doesn't look quite as nice, it still plays the same. And I would tell you, you're right, you can. Absolutely. And that's a valid concern for any consumer. And nobody should be calling you cheap for taking the cheaper alternative. I know, that's like, what? Why did you just say that? Are you out of your mind? No. Nobody should be calling you out on that. You are being a responsible consumer by choosing that free version. When there's a cheaper version available, why would you buy the more expensive one? And I'm not a salesman for this game, but honestly, when I look at this, it's nice that they removed the microtransactions, but honestly, you didn't need them anyway. Getting additional heroes was cool, and it gave a little bit more variety to the game, but it was not required at all for the game to be playable. Not at all. I'm trying not to say by any stretch of the imagination, but you know what, I'm going to say it anyway. By no stretch of the imagination do you need those heroes in order to play that game, or those buffs, in fact, to play the game. It works absolutely fine without them. So I can definitely appreciate the fact that they decided to remove that stuff. Once you get further into the game, there's an awful lot of different towers available. You can mix tower types, which means I believe there's like 16 towers as a direct result of that, because you got 4x4 there. A lot more enemy types, a lot more interactivity as well. The game gets incredibly difficult, and there's a lot of replayability, thanks to the addition of the two modes, Iron and the harder challenge mode, Heroic, I believe they call it. And that makes the game very, very playable. And it means that you could spend hours on it, and plenty of people have. Make no mistake, Kingdom Rush is a hot property on iOS. It's been a hot property for a long time, and it's also one of the most popular Flash games ever made. But with the current technical problems, which hopefully will be fixed by the time that you get around to watching this video, although I can't guarantee that, it's hard to recommend the game. It's really good. And I think that, yes, the devs do deserve to be paid for their work. It's like, just because something is a free Flash game doesn't mean that I believe that the devs are not entitled to actually get something for what they've done. They worked hard on this game, they did a good job. But with so many other tower defense games available on Steam right now that don't have these levels of technical problems, and also maybe have things like multiplayer. The game that I mentioned earlier that I probably screwed up completely. Soul Survivor, that's the name of it. Not Soul Sacrifice. Well, I was thinking of the PlayStation Vita game. No, Soul Survivor actually has a really good multiplayer that has the style of Wintermore Wars going on with it, whereby what you do ends up being aggressive towards the other players, which I think is a really, really nice set of mechanics. There's none of that here. This is purely a single-player game. And there's plenty of modified tower defenses available in other titles as well that will give you that kind of functionality. As you can see, this level was not that difficult. Those of you who watched the research stream know that I got absolutely trounced on this level multiple times because of that frame rate problem, but we managed to 3-star it no problem here. So, conclusion on Kingdom Rush. It is a great tower defense. It is a really good tower defense. There's no doubt about that. It's one of the best tower defense games. But you can play it for free on Armor Games, and on iOS it's a lot cheaper. And surprisingly enough, it actually works pretty well on iOS. I think it works a little bit better here. Ooh, cool. Level 3 towers now available. Very, very slick. And Geralt Lightseeker is going to sit around. And you can move them around, as you might imagine, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of good variety here and really nice level design, which I definitely appreciate. There we go. Even things like the voice acting and the art style are very nicely put together. But you can still play it for free. And the iOS version is still a lot cheaper. And we already have really good tower defense games. So, it becomes a harder sell, honestly. It really does. I'd love to tell you that it doesn't, but it's a much harder sell as a result of those things. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Taking a look here at Kingdom Rush, which is now available on PC for $10 or your regional equivalent. Or you can get it on iOS for about 99 cents or play it free on Armor Games with a slightly lower resolution. Depends as to whether or not you are okay with that. Thank you very much for watching, folks. I'll see you next time.